and welcome to the 14th LILA PRISM lecture. Very happy to see all of you and really delighted that we have Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan with us. I'm really moved by how she is here today because she's not keeping quite well. And she said there's this commitment and I'll be there, though she's actually not, I know that she's not feeling very comfortable. So what we thought was we will, whatever she is comfortable, she will speak. But after that, I would encourage the audience to really be in interaction so that we can, it's very important that we, people like her are with us and we must, this is our chance to be in their presence. So we must, actually be in their presence and they should be in our presence. So that interaction should happen. I hope that will happen. Before we start, I would like to kind of pose a few questions and concerns about how we are organizing this particular lecture and why Kapila is here today. We have been, this has been a series of lectures which we've been organizing for the past 3 years. And from the first year, please switch off your mobiles. Thank you. So from the first year, this has been a major concern with us because when we look at India, we think that this whole development narrative that we have about, okay, we have to build infrastructure, we have to have certain kind of buildings, constructions. The whole development narrative which is based on construction and building and infrastructure, without people and culture in that whole narrative, this has been really bothering us. So from the very beginning, we thought arts is a space where we can actually enter into this discourse and see how we can begin to interact, intervene there. And this was also a personal concern for me because I was teaching at the university, I still do. So if you look at funds and grants that are given to the humanities, you see that there's a kind of drop in this in the last few years because the UGC and other agencies think that the arts, humanities are ineffectual. That's what is the purpose. So people don't seem to be, the administration, the establishment does not seem to be quite understanding what is the purpose of the arts, so we need to, it looks as though, you need to have a specific purpose, a certain kind of goal which can be achieved in a certain ready time. So this was also bothering because this also is not affecting the discourses of continuity, how we sustain ourselves over a period of time, all these kind of things. It also would reflect on our attitude towards older generation, older things, what our histories, etc. So there's lack of respect which is generating from this whole narrative. So it's in this context that we thought arts and how it is, the administration of the arts has to be looked at and it has to be brought into the discourse of governance and narrative, the discussions of governance. So in the first year we had Sadanand Menon talking about the state of art institutions in this country. In this series we had Jyotindra Jain and Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh speaking on this, artistic heritage. And this is a continuation of that, and this is the last lecture in that continuity in this year. And Kapila ji, as all of you know, I don't have to really talk about her in this audience, but I want to look at this from two angles and pose these questions so we can actually start the discussion. One is when you talk about arts administration, there is a space that we are looking at within the arts, like how are we managing the arts within that space called arts? How are we is it about event management? Is it about organizing certain events regularly? You're looking at the institutions that we have, it seems so, like you have regular events and you're happy about organizing these events. It has come to that. Is it about that? Is administration about that? The second thing is, how is this space called arts interacting with the rest of the world, and how is it contributing? What is the insight that we derive from this space? So that is why this thing is important about governance. What is the insight that we derive from the world of arts for governance thinking? So that is another question that we would want to discuss. So in both these questions, Kapila is very important, because if you look at, I'm just citing an example of how art administration is philosophical rather than purely infrastructural and that kind of a thing. Because management, if you look at IGNCA, now when you look at the website, I sometimes feel very sad looking at this and people talking about these 5 departments as though they are, it is administration, it is that, this, etc. But when she first talked about these 5 trees, 5 stones which are gathered from 5 rivers, and 5 philosophical departments, like in terms of thinking about these functions, there was a continuity within which you were looking at these ideas. There's a continuity of nature and people. There's a continuity of all the arts and how you're trying to integrate all these things. Suddenly, over a period of time, it becomes a kind of administrative, bureaucratic thing, and you say that, okay, you go to this department and get your papers done, or something like that. So what is happening to that vision? So that is why she is very important for us, because at this point, if things are not sustaining themselves, there is this lack of philosophical vision, which is in building institutions. And we have to reclaim that. It's very, very essential for us to reclaim this. And that's why she's very important. She's been asking everybody, why are you wasting your time? Kapila, I would say that this is why we are here. It's very important for us. I wouldn't get into introducing her because I think it's redundant. But I would like to say that this is this continuity that she has been exploring, because there are some young people here also, from linguistics to ethnography to dance, practice of dance to art history. There are various disciplines that she's got into through her long career, and there is a continuity that she has established. There's a continuity of space and time that she has established when she's curating something, when she's having an art exhibition. It is not about putting some things together, and there's a vision which is animating this whole thing, driving it. So it is that vision that we want to reclaim, and that is why we are in your presence, Kapilaji. And however you're comfortable, let us start this discussion today. And over to you. I'll sit here just to kind of moderate the discussion. Thank you.
Now, you want me to sit or you want me to stand?
Whatever you're comfortable.
I might be comfortable partly here and partly there.
No, you can be here.
All right, fine. Thank you for these generous words. I'm in a bit of a loss where to begin this thing which she has formulated as arts administration. There are 2 sections here. One, something which is called art. The other, which she has talked about, administration. And a third, in terms of the LILA Foundation itself, of transformative governance. These are the 3 components. What do we do with these 3 components? Do we talk about first art or arts. Kumar Swami, my intellectual guru, had said in one of his famous lectures that every human being is a unique artist. And that's where I want to begin. Because the fact of each one of us as human beings, as the Homo sapien, has certain faculties. Those faculties are unique. Those faculties are what one would call, in another semantic language, creative. And that the fact of someone's doing, have you ever seen a woman work with a spindle? Have you ever seen a carpenter work with his tools? Have you ever seen even what we would otherwise, the janitor who comes and the way that he cleans your, and the strokes that he makes, whether they are right to left or left to right or something like that. And the fact, and I'll quote His Holiness the Dalai Lama in another thing. Someone asked him, Your Holiness, what is art and what is compassion? So His Holiness took out his Uttaya, and I'll never in my life forget that, which is one of his birthday occasions. He said, creative act, compassion. Have you ever seen a mother suckle her baby? That is the first creative act, and that is compassion. And the manner in which he did this physical gesture of taking his Uttariya and putting it, I think I'll never in my life forget that gesture. For me, that is the greatest artistic act that anyone could have demonstrated in terms of what was presented, in terms of what the person who was presenting it, and in terms of the communication that took place in that 1 minute or the 5 minutes that he spoke about. That is the creative act. That is the creative act, not restricted to, or not what we would say, painting and dance and music and whatever else we may consider to be stonework or sculpture or so on. I think what our first thing that we have to address ourselves is to ask the question, what exactly is art? When we use this word, and if you go into the word kala in the Indian or in the Sanskrit language, you will come to a plethora of definitions, and the subject is as vast, not to speak about the Kama Sutra and the 64 kalas that are listed there. So what is art? How are we defining art? And I think that this is the first question that I'd like to pose to all of you. And I want this much more as an interactive session rather than my going on giving you a monologue. I want to raise these questions because I think that there is today somewhat of a misunderstanding, especially in this country which we call India, that we think that the arts means X number of arts and an aggregation in terms of जल्दी से ये कर दो लीजिए परफॉर्मिंग आर्ट्स है, ये प्लास्टिक आर्ट्स है, ये लिटरेरी आर्ट्स है, ये क्लासिफिकेशन कर दो, ये हाई आर्ट है, ये फोक आर्ट है, सब तरह के एडजेक्टिव्स लगा के और उसका बेड़ा गर्क कर दो. कि अगर कोई पेंटिंग करता है तो उसका मतलब है कि उसको मूवमेंट से कोई मतलब नहीं है, कोई म्यूजिक करता है तो इसका मतलब है कि उसको डांस फॉर्म से कोई मतलब नहीं है। और भाई म्यूजिक इज द मोस्ट डायनेमिक kind of a presentation in which there is movement that is taking place every minute. So that whenever we, so moment we give these adjectives, we have to be very, very careful that these adjectives are loaded. They are loaded with some kind of a immediate history. They are also loaded with ancient history. I think that when we therefore talk about art, I with my background have to go back into not only what I have said, that art itself is a creative act and it belongs to every human being, whether we call them an artist or not. Because the appellation calling people an artist is an adjectival clause in which we have made certain assumptions and then we say that, acha, he's an amateur artist. भाई amateur क्यों हो गया? क्योंकि उससे पैसा नहीं कमाता, इसलिए वो amateur artist हो गया. And things like that we have to address ourselves. But I think to address ourselves to the fact that every human being, or for that matter, every living creature on earth has a capacity of what one would call aesthetics. And that capacity is articulated, it is expressed in numerous ways, and it is not one-dimensional. It is multi-volumed, it is multi-dimensional. There can be no dance without music, there can be no literature without rhythm, there can be no music without movement, there can, etc., etc. This takes you into an area which I have done a little work in my life, and that is the area of the interrelationship of the arts. I want to quote here the Vishnu Dharmottara Puran, in which it begins its Chitta Sutra by talking about, and I will not quote it in Sanskrit because Sanskrit is a national language and yet it is something that we mustn't speak it in public forums. It says, as in painting, so also in dance. This is Yatha Chitra Yatha Nitya. And it goes on to tell you of the relationship of the one art with the other. And this is a wonderful conversation between Vaj and Markandeya. In that he opens up a whole field of the interrelationship of the what we would today call the arts. So that's another dimension, that no art on earth is what we call about autonomy. We have known all the movements and the history of the movements in the West, talking about the autonomy of each of the arts, and there has been a whole debate, especially in the 19th and the 20th century, on the subject. But we may not address ourselves to those issues which talks about A, the interrelationship of the arts, or the autonomy of the arts, whatever we call these arts to be, and then the nature of the classification of the arts. Pushpaji is here. I think the greatest art on earth is the culinary art. लेकिन बाबा ये जोर से नहीं कहना है, क्योंकि ये तो खाने पीने का मामला, ये तो आर्ट का मामला नहीं है. And yet the greatest piece of art is when a woman makes a fine chapati. और वो जब फूल जाती है, so that is the biggest art. And therefore we have got certain types of biases in our mind in which we consider to be what is art and what is not art. That is the one point that I would want to make, and I want to re-emphasize and say and go back to Kumaraswamy, that every individual is a unique artist. One could extend that to other species of life. And have you ever seen how a tree moves, or how a plant moves, or how it reacts? If that is not dance, and if that is not response, and if it is not that is a response theory, what else is it? It is art. So the definitions of art, I think. Now let me go, because I want to have this as an interactive session. I won't take too much time. Is the other part of the statement, administration and governance. अब तो मैं अपने ब्यूरोक्रेट का हैट पहन लूं, क्योंकि जहाँ हमने, और हिंदी में थोड़ी सी बात करूँगी, जहाँ हमने एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की बात की, तो हमने वहाँ पर एक वर्गीकरण कर दिया कि there is one group of people, and I'll do that in English now. The moment we talk about administration, we think there is one group of what is known as the performance or the actors in the field of the arts, and there is another group which is dealing with administration. We have not talked, so when we say, oh, so-and-so is a very good art administrator, इसका मतलब दूसरे, in another language, it means he is a very good event manager, so that the administration. Now the moment this formulation which has been made, there are certain assumptions, and I want to go into those assumptions. Assumptions are that there is a category called the arts. This category deals with creativity, this category deals with expression, it deals with a number of what one would call a group of people whom we call artists, whatever the nature of those artists may be. And then we presume then there's another second category, a second category which we call art administrators, and that therefore the two shall never meet, and there is the predominance of one over the other, and in the very formulation, Lila, please forgive me, Raju, in the very formulation there is a tension that has been stated here, because arts and administration, or the administration of arts, always means that there is some problem and there is a tension which has to be resolved. Let's not really say that he is so-and-so is a very sympathetic administrator. The moment we say sympathetic, he is a very open-minded, he is a very close-minded administrator. All the time, a dichotomy has been established. A dichotomy has been established between the creative act and those that are responsible, whether the artists themselves or who are responsible for looking at the what one would call the management of the creative act for public purposes. Because that administrative act is not an act of absolute privacy, and therefore we come to the category of the category of patronage. That becomes a very important category, whether the administrator is a patron of the arts or not. The second category is whether the administrator is only a financier of the arts or not. A third category is that this person, the administrator, has a liaison with those whom he considers, or those who are concerned with this that I have mentioned earlier, the creative act, and how does he nurture that in a moment in which there is freedom. There is no kind of remote or approximation in terms of any type of direction. And what is it? And this is a very complex area. It's an extremely complex area because once we go into this, we have to look at our present predicaments. We have to look at the international situation where we are talking about arts administration. Now there are many, many models that. And those models will take me into financial matters, which I'll come to in a minute. Because those models, whether you go to the first, it was the state in the Soviet Union and all the totalitarian states, art was being administered. It was being administered by the state directly. And it was being given direction by the state. And all those wonderful ensembles that we have known, and myself and the Russian ballet and so on, this was state-sponsored artistic activity. Directly state-sponsored, not only state-sponsored, but state-administered. And that is the whole history of then in what we would call the democracies, there have been other models. There has been the model in terms of always there is the model of a separation that takes place. So you have the Arts Council, whether it is of Britain, or you have the Palladiums in USA, but there you have the model of foundations. Those foundations naturally have something to do with governance and the government of the day, but they are not directly involved in it. You have a third model, which is a mix of model in our democracy, in which you have this is by the government, and other things you feel that it is something left to the artist and the artist has freedom, or the artistic activity has freedom. Now that's not always true. Which brings me to my final section, and that final section is that we're really talking here not of an international situation. The presumption in your formulation is a presumption which is a local and a national presumption. Because somewhere at the back of our mind we have this key, we have administration of the arts, and therefore you have a department of culture which is looking after the administration of the arts, or you have sections in the Ministry of I&B, and you have, of course, in rural development, you have everywhere a section which is dealing with what we would call artistic activity. And that someone is monitoring that, someone is not only monitoring that, but someone is financing that or subsidizing that. And the moment you come into that, then you have another category whether you need to have art administrators. And that is where life becomes a little more complicated, because then do you have people who are administrators, whether they are in the field of the performing arts and all these categories that we have drawn up, performing arts, plastic arts, literary arts, folk arts, tribal arts, classical arts, and the whole lot. Where do we stop there? And what we have to then take this, and I will not elaborate on this further, I could go into our absolute immediate situation of the establishment of certain institutions by the government of India, and we are now in the government of India, we are not in an international situation, by the government of India, by whoever these people were, and whoever, one knows these people. After all, you read the speeches of Maulana Azad when the academies were set up, you read the speeches of Jawaharlal Nehru, you read the speeches or sayings of Dr. Radhakrishnan. These were, especially we had come to the academies, that they were established by the state because the state felt that the state had not come into the field of the arts. And as I said a little while ago, in the Soviet Union, it was the state that came in prima facie explicitly into this domain. Now the state said that we will come into this, but we will come into it by a mechanism which we call the mechanism of autonomous bodies, quote unquote, inverted commas. We will establish autonomous bodies. And don't we then remember the famous statement of the Sri Jawaharlal Nehru, who said, I shall never allow the Prime Minister, he was the President of the Science Academy, I shall never allow the Prime Minister of the country to intervene or give orders to the President of the Science Academy. These are his famous words, which hold within itself this entire question of the relationship of the government of the day, of the state, and the very autonomous bodies that it sets up, and what is the nature of that. And many of you here who are present are privy to what happens in this thing. Many kinds of solutions were found out, or at least suggested, that there should be an autonomy in functioning, but not autonomy in policy making. Then there was something that there should be an autonomy of some kind of a functioning, but in financial matters, they had to go back to the government of India. In work, and I speak as a long time on a rather dilapidated and rusted bureaucrat, and I can tell you that it has never worked. Sometimes you have to cut out the rules or something like that, because the very nature, because it takes into not only the administrator who's sitting in the administrative ministry, but it is somewhere else that the power lies, and the power lies with the financial advisor. And I'm making this into a very crude statement, and I'm aware of the fact that the kind of statement that I'm making, and I can be subject to great criticism, but I speak from experience of over half a century, of knowing that exactly where the shoe pinches. Because the moment you have a financial advisor who is the chairman of the finance committee, and yet he is the financial advisor to the government of India, and I can give you many hilarious instances where he has been party to a decision in the autonomous body, but he has overruled that decision as the financial advisor in the Ministry of Administrative Ministry. The whole relationship of that, and one is not going into merely the field of the arts, one is going into the entire system of what I have said in my writing, and I will quote myself ill-mannered as I am, in terms of the whole issue of accountability in terms of administration, accountability and autonomy. What is that accountability? To whom is the accountability? Because in that it is not only the administrative ministry, but what comes into it is the finance ministry, and what comes into it is finally the AGCR. These are nitty-gritties which I don't think you wanted me to talk about. You wanted me to talk about all very nice pinky things about art and artistic administration and the nature of the classification. But it is my responsibility to bring home to this audience that in the actual working, when it comes to that, actual working is the question of the relationship of autonomy and accountability. and how much is that accountability to yourself, or how much is that accountability to a remote control administrative unit which may or may not be. And as one of the very distinguished members of the audience here, and I will not name him, but he tells me a story about there being in the Shimla Institute, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. तो उन्होंने कहा जी कि वो आए थे, एक रिव्यू कमेटी बनाई गई, हिंदी समझते हैं ना आप लोग? अच्छा, रिव्यू कमेटी बनाई गई थी, वो इधर उधर गए, तो उन्होंने कहा जी कि आप पेड़ के नीचे बैठ के ये क्या कर रहे हैं? ये किताब लिख रहा हूँ। कितनी देर में किताब लिखी जाएगी? कहने कि ये तो किताब लिखी जाएगी जितने, कहने ये तो ठीक है, लेकिन आप काम क्या करते हैं? किताब तो आप लिख रहे हैं, ये तो बताइए कि आप काम क्या करते हैं? And well, it was the disaster of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. It was closed down, it was reopened, and that's a whole chapter that I will not open. I can open you all the chapters on most of the institutions, and on which I have had the misfortune of writing a great deal already. I think that I have opened up the subject to a point of disaster, and I'll now leave it to all of you to ask questions, because I do want this as an interactive session and not my old woman just taking off. I want to make a last point. This is in terms of administration and in terms of the financial part. Whenever an attempt was made, and now I speak about my experience in the IDNCA, the whole idea was to create a trust, and the idea was that by giving, and now of course the government of India has accepted this principle in terms of some of the universities that have been set up, was to give a corpus and then allow that corpus to generate its own funding so that you were not directly responsible. I got it in the neck, and so did that poor institution got it in the neck, because they said that you have gone out of accountability. And I shall make this personal statement publicly here with, I started the institution with 50 crores as corpus fund. I ran the institution for 14 years. I left the institution with 50 plus 40 crores. And I ran the institution. Because it was self-accountability. And it was saving from the very corp. These are, otherwise what you do have is the annual grant system, which I think is such an unhealthy system. Because on the 31st of March, I must have signed, I think, about 5,000 TR-42 forms so that they jaldi se grant nikal jaye. One knows all those, I've been through the nitty-gritty of it. And unless, what was the attack then? Attack in parliament, attack in press, attack in the media, कि जी वो तो पैसे लेके भाग गई हैं. भाई पैसे लेके कहाँ से भाग सकती थी? Because every penny was invested in government securities. But the accountability in terms of the nitty-gritty to the financial advisor, to the financial advisor, to the government of India, from the government of India to the Parliament of India, that was something which could not be followed by anyone who believed in full autonomy. And you did mention I mentioned just this one. I can give you other instances, because unless, and when we talk about administration, then that enlightened administration has to be an administration where public funds are available undoubtedly, but public funds do not come with the strings of the nitty-gritty. And in the very nature of our system, and now I'm being even more ill-manneredly, but in the very nature of our system, power shifts to the secondary level. It is not even at the primary level, it is not at the political level. power then shifts in the actual working of the administration to the secondary level, that is in Hindi बाबूगिरी हो जाती है तब, और वो बाबूगिरी मैं खूब जानती हूँ और उसमें मेरा भी बहुत रियाज है. And unless we can address ourselves to these questions, all this talk about administration and all this talk about high-powered business, all this is not at all, may I say, speaking in terms of the actual nitty-gritty of the working. So, madam, when you talk about administration, it's not something very pretty. It is something rather with nettles, and we should address ourselves. This is a local situation. It's not just a local situation. You can go anywhere in India and you will find the same kind of thing, and we will not go into what these regulations are. And I, as an old dilapidated clerk, can give you the sections, and I can give you where the shoe pinches and what regulation should be changed. And every time I have suggested that in the, and I'm an old woman so that I can speak a little frankly, and I have suggested all these things to the government of India. क्योंकि आप पूछेंगे मुझसे कि जी आप सरकार में 50 साल रही हैं, आप क्या करती रही हैं? जी मैंने बहुत कोशिश की और बहुत कोशिश की. And what was I told? Kapila ji, and I've been told this by 3 ministers, you're a very good officer and a very good advisor, but your solutions are very radical. We cannot accept them. And I have sat night after night, making charts and saying, this regulation should be changed to this regulation should be changed to this regulation. Then only can we have elbow room and freedom for what we call the arts. Freedom to create, freedom to be yourself, freedom to be accountable to yourself, freedom in that sense. And now, please pardon me for all this harangue. I've already spoken too much, and now I am open to questions or questionings and anything else that you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kapila. So this is now open, and let's begin to talk. Please take the mic.
Take the mic, introduce yourself so that we know how it's like. Oh, we're going to begin with this page. I'm channeling already.
I'm a little less old, but I'm more foolish than I was in my youth. I'm not as old, but I have a very silly kind of question. And I don't think anybody else will ask. Is there a relationship between art governance, forget about administration, and what you have is the contemporary issue of identity and tradition? So is there something which impinges on how art flourishes or is extinguished in a particular society? You did mention Soviet Union, you did mention the democratic models and the totalitarian models, and there is this tension, to my mind, between the cultured people and the uncouth Philistines, the civilized people and the barbarians, and the kind of value you put on a culture which is your own vis-a-vis the other culture, the culture of the victor, of the vanquished, and you go over the evolution of this thing, that who has the patronage. You brilliantly put it that there is an issue of patronage. So if in a society like India or in a society like Asia, you have a category which Zimmer would say Asian art, and then Asian art is something very different from more contemporary European art or something. So Europe is Europe and Asia is Asia, and you did very evocatively mention the twain shall never meet. And then is there some connection there between tradition and what we think is a modernity imported from West, which confuses this issue? If we were not in the revivalist mode, but we accepted that there is a culture to which we belong, Asiatic, within which there is a subset of Indian culture, not necessarily that we do this all the time, and we have problems with administration because the project of post-independent modernization of India puts emphasis on one Nehruvian model which borrows heavily from the Western world, and then we have models of administration and models of autonomy where the Prime Minister says, I will not allow this to be less than autonomous, but there is a dispensation given totalitarian.
Well, you said it all. I could agree with you both. Pushpeji, because...
You have to again do it, Ji. You had promised last time not to do the Ji, but
अच्छा वो निकाल देते हैं. But you said it all. You said it all. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that this is the crux of the problem. And thank you for bringing out. I should not allow. That word allow really takes the cat out of the bag. And this is something which we have not addressed. I'll give you the other instance, and this is the old woman again speaking. Maulana was the only person who was opposed or had great misgivings on the registration of the academies. And his exact words, I will quote as a young officer who was sat there, तुम लोग ये जल्दबाजी क्यों करते हो? फना मिलेंगे, गुफ्तगू करेंगे, जो उनके जहन में आएगा और जो वो समझेंगे कि उनको अपने आप को किन हकों में बांटना चाहिए और क्या करना चाहिए, तो आप उनको ये रजिस्टर्ड सोसाइटी के फंदे में क्यों डाल रहे हो? And ultimately he had to give in because, and I think that no one has ever talked about this. I have talked about it. I have written files after files to no avail that Registration of Societies Act of 1864 है ना, जब तक नहीं बदला जाएगा हम लोगों का बहुत से संस्थान का कोई निदान नहीं हो सकता. डॉक्टर आनंद.
My name is Anand Kumar, and Madam, as you spoke very beautifully, and I would say that art is a joyous expression of the soul. Any kind of art, it has some kind of inbuilt joy, and then it becomes the same work. Making a chapati becomes an art, in case it has a component of joy. And poetry and dance always had, from time immemorial, they had some kind of administration or patronage by the cohorts or by rich men or business people. But what about paintings? How that we have seen the paintings in Ajanta and Ellora, and they were even at other places. And the Mughals were also very fond of these miniatures, and Shah Jahan even used to rob European travelers to India, to rob them of their paintings that they used to bring to present it to Jahangir, because he was a very fond collector. So I have no idea, if somebody knows, that how these paintings and sculptures they were curated, or what they used to do. They used to just collect them in an album, or how they used to manage with paintings, poetry, and of course dance. We all know very well. If you can throw some light on this.
I'll certainly throw some light on this. I think that you think Ajanta and Ellora and all these sculptures, they just came into being from nowhere. There was patronage there. There was, and all the miniature paintings, they were patronage. And we have not talked about the word patronage as distinct from the word administration. But I think that the patronage, and you think Ajanta would have come into being suo motu? They were commissioned. We know the names of the artists who were commissioned to do that. We know the names of the Bhagavad Puran great Bhagavad Puran of the Translocal Institute, who was a Muslim who did that, and he was commissioned. These are all commissioned things. There have been things which have not been commissioned, but as far as ancient Indian art is concerned, as far as all of what you know in Sarnath, there were people who had commissioned, and you have inscriptions which tell you that either who was the patron who gave the money, or from where it came, or how it was done. It is true that the artists were important people and that they had a great deal of freedom, and that is all right. But we cannot get away from the fact that these were all the results, all the miniature paintings. अगर वो महाराजे और राजे पैसा नहीं देते और उनको कमीशन नहीं करते कि आप गीत गोविंद की सीरीज बना दो, आप ये कर दो, आप वो कर दो, तो वैसे ही हो जाते.
But they were never displayed anywhere, or were they displayed in palaces? These
Of course,
paintings,
of course, of course.
they were displayed.
Of course, of course. All over.
So I was interested in knowing your views about the Lalit Kala Academy, its contribution to the art, how much patronage and how much, it's administratively it has contributed. And I also had a second question, because you mentioned that some of your ideas are very radical and various ministers were not very interested. If you could share some of those radical ideas, that would be very nice.
I'll begin with the last. I thought that I myself sitting here is quite radical. What more do you want? Anyone who can be as explicit as I have been could not be less than a radical, even if the word radical has much better nuances than the word radical as you have pushed it. I don't want to go into specific academies. It's not my business here to talk about 3 academies and the Lalit Kala Academy. The Lalit Kala Academy, and he asked the question about the paintings. Please look at the earlier series of the Lalit Kala, the big volume that they used to bring out, which has been given up, called Lalit Kala. I think it did such a wonderful task of bringing to light various aspects of, and in that you had stalwarts, you had the academy of course, but you had the Rai Krishna Das, you had the Dr. Moti Chandra, you had the Mr. Kal Khandalwala. They were giving it the vision. And you had all those series of miniature paintings, which you see those albums, they are still very good. And the Lalit Kala Academy's work, Lalit Kala Academy is doing work, and the Biennale has been excellent. The fact that Lalit Kala Academy has its own problems, thanks to, I have to thank whom? Zara mushkil ki baat hai, thanks to the artists themselves, partly. I've talked about the other side, but I think that the fact that we will have a collegiate, we will do this, and one has to say that the artist, I've talked about the artist as being art being a creative act. I've talked about the autonomy of the artist, but I have not talked about one thing, and that's very, very inflammable. I better not talk about it. क्योंकि ईगो के बिना आर्ट नहीं होता है, बड़ा जबरदस्त ईगो चाहिए होता है, लेकिन उस ईगो को पार करने में ही आर्ट होता है, ये बात है. And what art does, and that is exactly, and tomes have been written, and especially in the Indian context, there has been so much writing, and also in Japanese writing, and in terms of No, and in terms of the entire pictorial tradition, that unless you come to a point where the artist, the human being, the ego of the artist is annihilated, there can be no great art. And the moment this thing, that art, since you're the creator, it also creates in you a highly egoistical sense. Don't let me talk about the performing arts. And this is a challenge which every artist has to face. If sometimes they're conscious of it, sometimes they're not conscious of it. And the artist, and in other arts, there's a camouflage which takes place. क्योंकि प्रेमचंद तो प्रेमचंद था, वो लिख सकता था, उसके पीछे वो हो सकता था. But in poetry also you can, in painting also there can be a distances. In music also there can be a kind of a distance. But this thing called dance, you're dealing with the body, right? And you're dealing with the body, and to really enhance the body, or to get over the body through the body, where, and as Age said, when there is the dance but not the dancer. And that is such a serious challenge on which many people have fallen. But there have been great dancers. And I think that there you have to make a distinction between different types of arts and what are the specific challenges of each of these. And we have not talked about this category which we have called folk and tribal arts or something like that, because there are different types of challenges, and how you make a community thing into a presentation thing. I hope I've been able to answer your question somewhat.
Katie Ravindran.
Katie, I don't want to hear you. Go ahead.
I have a question. On the one hand, we see the art institution as a free space where art can flower. And on the other hand, when you have government or any other kind of patronage, we see it also as an extension of an instrument of certain ideology, which, of course, on which all governmental systems are based. So, could you comment on this tension that exists between the free space and as an instrument?
Thank you very much, Ravindra. That's a very serious question that you have raised. And I think that the space for free space is a very limited space. It cannot be absolutely free, because once again, you are talking about policies at the political level. And those policies with change of government or change of even one knows all this. And in terms of political affiliations that you have the extreme left, you have the right, you have the middle path, etc., etc. And that invariably impinges, and you as an architect knows what happens there in some cases. Then there is the question in terms of how much elbow room that the artist or the architect can find in order to make his own statement. He does make that statement, but I think that this is a real issue which you have raised, and I want to thank you for that.
I have a question, Kapila. Our foundation is called Foundation for Translocal Initiatives. This term translocal was a kind of response to a creative response to the term glocal, which we thought was trying to put one global and one local, kind of yoking them almost violently to create a kind of show. So you have a glocal event happening, and then you're looking at that particular event, and that when the show is over, you do not know where the local has gone and where the global has gone. And also, you are almost always thinking about the global as a certain specific Western global or whatever, and local as maybe the third world local. But as experientially, we know that the local is the experiential local. You know, anywhere can be the local. So we were thinking about the possibility of how to, be in the knowledge of the local, but at the same time being able to reach out, not only to share our local with the world, but also to receive. So this exchange, possibility of exchange. So we thought it is very important to look at the transit, the route, rather than the destination. Because to us, local seemed a destination, a kind of predetermined destination, while translocal opened a lot of possibilities. So when we are thinking about this whole series and question of governance through different disciplines, we are actually trying to see if there is a possibility of this translocality which can be brought into governance. So in the field of arts, like because you were mentioning tribal, folk, all these kind of community experiences of art, which and maybe at this point is competing. Is in a situation of a disadvantage, because there is this whole thing about presentation before the world. So how do we negotiate this? How do we go about this?
Well, I don't know how to respond to this, because whatever you call local is local, and yet it can be universal. That's it. When we talk in terms of only situations of situ, then we say that this is local and this can be global or something. But when we talk in terms of the evaluative categories, anything that is local, is the padwani wali, gaane wali hoti hai, ये लोकल है, ये यूनिवर्सल है, टीचर बाय ऐसी जबरदस्त यूनिवर्सल है कि कुछ पूछो नहीं. And you see that in any of these forms, you have, and it depends entirely in terms of the creativity that is contained in that local, and it cannot be circumscribed by any external criteria like that. This is what I would, and in that everything you people do all these festivals of literature in Jaipur and so on. Some of them are local, some of them are global, and it depends upon the art. And we can talk about this in literature in a certain way, but we cannot talk about it in terms of the other. Now you've had these tribal artists, the Warli painters. Now, Warli painters can never say that they are only local. They are global now. They are more than global. And it is a complicated question of patronage. It is a question of exposure. It is a question of how you go about it. It is a question of management. And so something doesn't have a suo moto, that something that I have done today, which certainly that can happen with a genius, but we have to think about this.
It's very interesting when I heard about the freedom, political freedom, and you talked about the ego. So this thing came to my mind that in Guru Shishya Parampara, perhaps that was a good cure for the ego, and the artist voluntarily gave his freedom to his guru to mold him and chisel him. So that was very much there. But when you come about political freedom, freedom on a larger canvas, then you find that the gharanas were there, which to some extent curtailed an artist to go beyond the limit. So nowadays, gharanas are not there, but then of course, political thing has, got into it. But then there were gharanas and egos and guru, shishya, parampara. So really I don't know how to,
Dr. Arun Kumar, I don't think that I want to equate gharanas and ego. In fact, no, Guru Shishya Parampara में ego का मामला ही नहीं था. वो तो जब तक आप गुरु को समर्पित नहीं हो जाते थे, तब तक तो आप कहीं पहुंच नहीं सकते
That was
थे।
losing the ego to your guru.
Or surrendering to the ego.
Surrendering the ego to your guru.
हैं?
Surrendering the ego to your guru.
Whether you call that giving your ego to the guru or not is a different matter, but I think that I was talking about another kind of a thing. जब आदमी पहुंच जाता है ना, I'm not talking about the guru शिष्य परंपरा here. जब पहुंच जाता है और स्टेज पर जब वाह होती है ना, और जब डांसर, तब जो ईगो निकलता, मैं उसकी बात कर रही हूँ। This is a slight difference.
Ma'am, my name is Praveen Davar. I am presently in the National Commission for Minorities. I have travelled a lot in South India, and I find there's a lot of difference between the art of North and South India. Now see the temples, for example. You know, their temples are so beautiful. Now, over so many thousands of years, why this art of South India could not travel north? Why it has just stopped in the 4 South Indian states, hasn't travelled beyond that? My second question is that how do you, in today's world, in the present circumstances, how do you, prevent the, how do you preserve the autonomy of the various institutions, especially guard them against communalization?
Very difficult questions. Don't have the ghost of an answer. Never mind. भाई साउथ में जो होता है तो साउथ में होता है, उसको नॉर्थ में आने की क्या जरूरत थी? बहुत मोटी सी बात है ये तो। साउथ में था, उसमें पेट्रन्स थे, उसमें किंग्स थे, उसमें नायक थे, वहाँ मराठास थे, चोलास थे, पांड्यास थे, वो लोग पेट्रनेज करते थे, उन्होंने ये सब बनाया। आपके यहाँ भी थे, आपके यहाँ खजुराहो था। अब आप मुझसे ये पूछे कि जी खजुराहो चिदम्बरम में क्यों नहीं पहुँच गया? मतलब पहुँचना चाहिए था। Now these are questions which I don't think need an answer. Every institution, ये मलयालम बोलते हैं, ये हिंदुस्तानी क्यों नहीं बोलते हैं? ये नॉर्थ में क्यों नहीं आ गए? This is the whole question, and you've heard this ad infinitum and ad nauseam of the diversity and the diversification of this country, and this is our great asset. That there is an absolutely local identity, and that local identity can become a universal identity, but it does not have to be translocal in order to be, and we have to make a difference in that. आपका दूसरा सवाल क्या था?
Protecting the autonomy.
ओहो, इसको तो मैं हाथ नहीं लगाने वाली हूँ। ये तो हमें अपने से, अपने अंदर से जवाब चाहिए। ये कोई बाहर वाला तो आके देगा नहीं। ये तो आप अपने अंदर से पूछिए कि आपके अंदर कितना कट्टर कोई हिंदू बैठा हुआ है, या कट्टर मुसलमान बैठा हुआ है, या कट्टर कुछ और बैठा हुआ है। ये तो आप अपने से सवाल पूछिए। और बाकी रही बाहर की बात, वो तो सियासी मामला है, उसमें होता ही रहता है। कभी इधर से हो गया, कभी उधर से हो गया, कभी एक्सट्रीम लेफ्ट से हो गया, कभी एक्सट्रीम राइट से हो गया। और वो तो हम लोग हिंदुस्तान में रहते हैं, हिंदुस्तान में हम लोग सब चीज़ों को झेल लेते हैं। आज ये होगा, कल कुछ और हो जाएगा, इसमें कौन सी बात है?
Another question?
No,
Take.
I am Manish Agarwal. Actually, I want to.
Is the mic on?
On.
Hello. I am Manish Agarwal. I want to know, arts is considered a very, it is for the elite. It is not reaching the common man. And nowadays, like art needs to be commercialized. You are saying that government, the patronage is not there, and the funding is funding is shrinking. So it needs commercialization. And now, like Pratibha Prahlad is there. She has the Prasiddha Foundation, and now it is organizing Delhi International Arts Festival. So what do you think of these things? Is this the answer to the lack of autonomy given by the government, or lack of patronage, diminishing patronage by the state? Is this the answer of the arts getting more and more commercialization of the arts, so that it reaches the common man and it can be self-sustainable? People can sustain it on their own. It becomes a thing of the public. It is owned by the public and not dictated by the state or the government. Doesn't
आप कॉमन मैन है या नहीं है? इसका जवाब दे दीजिए तो मैं आपको आपकी बात का जवाब दे दूँगा.
arts is considered a thing of the novio ricci. I mean, it is not considered a thing for the common man, because
Who is the common man?
a common man cannot understand the.
Who is the common man is the question I am asking you. Are you a common man or are you not a common man?
I am the common man in the sense that I do not understand the nuances of the fine arts. I mean,
पकड़ेगा, बड़ी बुरी तरह से पकड़ेगा. क्योंकि common man का जो हम our definitions are more serious.
civil society.
Now we are getting even more complicated. Civil society. Huh? तो भाई कॉमन मैन वो जो शंकर का और हमारे जो अभी जो डेथ कार्टून डाइड लक्ष्मण वो कॉमन मैन की बात करता था ना. And the most piercing comments that he made, and the most effective comments that he made through the common man. So we have a thing about the common man, and to put it in a very different language, we are really talking about a lower middle class. That when we talk about the common man, and this is what our perception is, without saying so. And otherwise, anyone who is interested, you can call them a common man or you may not call them a common man. I never said that the patronage is shrinking. I made no such statements. I did not say that arts are languishing. But I will go along with you by stating that there is a certain amount of commercialization today that has taken place in the arts. And that we have to address ourselves why the corporate sector, why these other institutions have entered, and whether it is a good thing or whether it is a bad thing or whether it is satisfactory or non-satisfactory. These are serious questions, because what our organizer has been talking about, this whole question of where you have patronage coming, and that patronage is coming from which sources and why is it coming, and whether it is a good thing or whether it is something to be questioned. That is something that, because there is a lot of commercialization that has taken place here in the name of the arts, and there is just too much as far as I'm an old woman, मतलब मैं तो departure long में हूँ ना, तो इसलिए सच बोल सकती हूँ. I'm a little wary of the kind of.
The flights have been cancelled.
Huh?
We are happy the flights have been cancelled.
अब वो तो देखा जाएगा ना, फिर रिवाइव हो सकती है. That in that, the main thing is that the quality of the arts is going down, and because we are having such emphasis on just sheer presentation. And that's a point which Rizzo has made earlier also, because I think that the transformative thing cannot happen unless we have a system by which you can do events, but you may not do commercialization, and that commercialization has kept into the whole field of the arts, whether it is the literary arts में एक तरह का problem शुरू हुआ है with festivals etc., which is a very good thing, which is also something problematic. Art world में plastic arts में दूसरी तरह का हुआ है, और music is something which is, you raise the question of the घराना, music में दम है, music में क्योंकि one-to-one transmission है और वहाँ पर दम है. And if anything will last in this country, it is music that will last. In that way. And some parts of, some kinds of dance, but little difficult, because dance is very tricky. You're dealing with the human body, and therefore dance is an extremely tricky business. And it is wonderful, and it is nothing like a dance without the dancer, but there cannot be a dancer, and that is where problems arise. तो आप जो है ना, मैंने ये सब नहीं कहा था कि पेट्रोनेज श्रिंक हो रहा है, ये तो आपने सुना.
Oracle of Delphi, you know, whatever she spoke, Oracle of Delphi, whatever she spoke, people misunderstood that. They heard something else. So maybe this has happened.
Not the Oracle of Delphi.
Actually, it was the view of the, moderator. She said that the education, like academics, the art, the emphasis is shrinking for the arts as against the science or the other disciplines. So that is what he meant.
This is a sentence that patronage is one thing, and the emphasis that you give, engagement that you give, I would like to use the word engagement. Engagement with the arts at a different level. Like that's why I was citing what Kapila was doing at the IGNC. The way she set up this institution was not about building a structure and saying, okay, this department will take care of this, or this department. She first, you must go and read up the, I would encourage everybody who has not known the history of IGNCA to actually understand how she set this up. It was not a physical setting up to begin with. It was a philosophical setting up, So that level of engagement, which will continue in the physicality, is very important. Unless if you start looking at the infrastructure for the arts separately, the physicality of the arts separately, and put all the emphasis only on that, and try to imagine that there is a certain purpose which should come from this particular physicality, then it becomes a very limited discourse, and it cannot sustain itself. So, because the purpose of art may not be, immediate and physical. It may have other resonances, which you may not be able to put across in one building a physical structure. That's what. So there is an emphasis within the academy, the educational spaces, to look at purposive kind of education. Like, okay, you do this, there's one-to-one correspondence between, okay, you do business communication, so you have these many campus interviews which will happen, which will give that institution a particular kind of thing. So these many people have been recruited from the campus, etc. So there's a one-to-one correspondence which is not good for education. That's what I was referring to.
I just wanted to say that the commercialization part, the festivals is taking it to the masses. Otherwise, it was only for the classes, and classical arts was not reaching the masses because the popular arts like the Bollywood and that is appealing to the masses more. So now the festivals and commercialization is helping in a way. Speak Mackey is a good example, which has taken the classical arts to the masses.
No, I would like to briefly respond. Like there is a distinction that we have to make between commercialization and this
And
whole thing.
popularization.
There is a difference. So that we will have to talk about. There's one more question there. Last question.
Thank you for the last question. My name is Aditya Male. Kapila, I just wanted to come back, if I may, to the first part of your beautiful, profound articulation of what the arts means or can mean. And I think in the beginning, if I understood correctly, you said that even the most commonplace acts that have been repeated maybe 100-fold or 1,000-fold, like making a chapati or like feeding a child, that these can be seen as creative acts, which I found very beautiful. And that requires a certain kind of listening to think of the commonplace or the everyday as creative, and not to segregate it, as you said, into terms of, into the artistic act being necessarily painting or music or high culture or low culture, etc. But that the commonplace is also creative and artistic. But that requires a certain kind of contextualization, a conscious contextualization, to see it that way, or to experience it that way, or to listen to it that way. And so I wanted to, if I may, bring that together with what you said about administration or governance, and whether, if I extend what you said in the beginning, whether that can be extended. Is there something, I mean, this is maybe a little provocative, is there something creative to be seen in administration at all? Or must we conclude that there are certain processes or certain structures in the world that are not creative or not artistic? If we see the commonplace and the everyday as being artistic, is there something that is always going, in a sense, against that, or that we have to struggle against? I hope this makes sense. I'm not sure.
Dr. Malik, I want to thank you most profoundly for what you have said. And the question that you have asked, I would not at all say that administration in its very nature is non-creative. I'm not saying that at all. I think that there have been instances, and I could give you as many instances. I've given you negative instances, but I could give you that unless there is an enlightened and what I would say a creative kind of a, what you would call an administrative person or an institution, there cannot be even an artistic. And I can give you examples from the Arts Council of Britain, where I've worked with colleagues who have been extremely creative, I think, in their approach to what they're doing with it. So one cannot draw, and if I have given you the impression that I'm making a negative statement all the way through, I wasn't making that statement. In the very nature, administration can be as creative as making a chapati.
I think today we have, there are a lot of things which have been opened up. I must thank Kapilaji for being here, but I also would like to refer to a kind of serendipitous kind of thing. Today, as we are speaking here at the Biennale in Kochi, we announced the first artist of the Biennale, who is a poet, Chilean poet, Raul Zurita. So he is reading in Cochin while we are speaking about this, which I think is very, very important. Like this, Raul is suffering from Parkinson's disease, and to think, like to also address that question, if it is a commercial enterprise completely, that people are, what people are trying to do now, and we are realizing, and we are trying to address certain issues which have to be taken very seriously, I guess, because if it is just that kind of a thing, you could have bands which could come, and you are looking at a poet and announcing at the Biennale of the Arts, a poet as a first artist. To see how the interconnections are understood, and they have to be there. So I think that's a very seminal kind of movement, and that we are talking about this. And here, that we are talking about that here is also important, I think, because actually speaking, when we exchanged this publicity, I mean the posters, Riaz Kobo, who is the Biennale's co-founder, he said, you know, we are having Raul here and you are having Kapila Vatsyayan there, so this makes a, you know, so even this conversation is very important for us, for the common man who is in love with arts. So thank you very much for being here, and we will continue these conversations in other LILA forums and elsewhere. Thank you very much, Kapila ji. This is an absolute